England are in a European final, and Arsenal are looking to do some transfer business in today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. You might be expecting me to start today a little bit more upbeat and a little bit more happy, considering, of course, England reaching a European Championship final. And we will get on to happier things and Arsenal transfers. But before we do, as someone in the journalistic space, yesterday was a very sad day because we discovered the news that BBC commentator John Hunt's family was sadly killed. And for those that aren't aware of this story, I recommend you go and read it and give it some of your time today, because I know there are a lot of people, colleagues of mine, who will have known John and known his family and will be very, very sad and distraught and not in a very good place today. And I wanted to send my condolences and thoughts and prayers to John and his family at what is an exceptionally difficult time. And for that of a lot of my colleagues who knew John and his family as well. So my thoughts and prayers are with all of you. But good morning to those joining us in the chat box. And from a footballing perspective solely, it is a good morning here in England as Bukayo Saka and Declan Rice have both reached the European Championships along with Aaron Ramsdale, of course, where they will face David Raya and Spain in the final on Sunday. It was probably the best performance by England in the tournament so far. And it came, of course, at the best possible time so far in the tournament, which was great to see. And I think that what we saw was some changes made by Southgate, which deserve credit, but hopefully some changes made by Southgate, which will stick because, and I will say good morning to you all, of course, very shortly. And I don't mean to go straight into the stories without doing so, but obviously it links quite seamlessly in with today's introduction. Phil Foden and Harry Kane should be replaced by Ollie Watkins and Cole Palmer in this side at the start of the game on Sunday. I think that both of them provided obviously much more incisiveness. And I feel Foden probably had his best game, had a couple of chances and shots and stuff. But overall, I still would be looking to start Cole Palmer and more so Ollie Watkins. I think that the Foden-Palmer debate is definitely one that can be had a lot more competitively. But Ollie Watkins should be starting over Harry Kane. And it's obvious, it should be obvious to see why, based upon the commitments of what we've seen so far. And I think over the course of the tournament, what we've seen is some interesting takes. But despite Phil's decent game, for me, it's just a bit hit and miss with Phil Foden. And for me, Kane should be replaced by Ollie Watkins come Sunday. And I really hope that does happen because Ollie Watkins, what a goal. Brilliant performance, brilliant finish. I can't believe I have people say that this guy was washed in my chat box in previous shows in months gone by throughout the course of the season. Brilliant player, and one whose age sadly is not in maybe a place where you'd hope it to be. You'd hope it to be in his early 20s and he can kind of get a massive move. But Aston Villa have got a hell of a striker, and Unai Emery has got a hell of a centre forward going into the next season, playing, of course, in the Champions League. So that is going to be very exciting to see, I'm sure. But let's say good morning to those joining us live in the chat box. Thank you so much, as always, for doing so. Good morning to James and Glenn, Barry, Brian, Jakob, Rowan, Steve, Paul, Errol, Rob, Mike, Dylan, Mark, Stevie, Aaron, Matt G, Ryan, Calabash, Sean, Paul, Maximius, Amesy, Answer, Gooner76, and Sean. Thank you to you all for tuning in. I very much appreciate your time and your listenership. And we started the show with a really tragic story, but I'm very happy to point towards a happier one here from Joey, who says, "Morning, TGT family. My partner and I are in the labour ward having a baby today. And I want to wish you and your other half, Joey, all the best. And I'm sure you're both going to absolutely smash parenthood. So congratulations on the way, I'm sure. Yes, congratulations, and I'm hoping that you have a fantastic process through all of that chaos and drama. As I'm hoping it's as successful as we saw England, of course, yesterday, getting through to the European Championship final. But let's go through today's stories, shall we? And make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. We start with Arsenal agreeing the loan and permanent sale of Nuno Tavares to Lazio. It is expected to be a €5 million deal with either, because there are conflicting reports, either add-ons taking it to around €7 to €8 million, or with a sell-on clause, or both potentially. There are conflicting reports, but that €5 million figure is what's being talked about. As far as I'm aware, that is indeed accurate. So that's obviously a good thing for Arsenal to get some money through the door next summer for Tavares, and that's obviously a very good thing. Sorry, for some reason the radio popped on in the car. It's when you do a show for the car, all of a sudden the radio starts playing. Yes, in terms of Nuno Tavares, a very good sale, and one, of course, that needed to happen this summer as well. Marseille are said, according to a number of outlets in France, Santi Una reporting that Marseille are interested in Eddie Nketiah. The story surrounding Mason Greenwood, of course, and Marseille is an interesting one. Supposedly, Marseille had agreed a deal, or pretty much agreed a deal with Manchester United to sign Mason Greenwood. But I don't know if you saw reports yesterday of the mayor of Marseille coming out to attempt to dissuade the French club from going through with the signing of Mason Greenwood, and perhaps that has raised the profile of Eddie Nketiah maybe as a potential alternative, or maybe they want both. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but there is certainly a market, it seems, for Nketiah, and I hope, of course, that he may indeed get Arsenal some money through the door. Arsenal's expectations, to our understanding, are upwards of £30 million potentially for a price tag of Eddie Nketiah. So let's wait and see what happens here, and let's see if indeed Arsenal are successful in getting a significant amount of money through the door for the England international striker, who could be off to France during this window. Another positive story. It's a really good day in terms of Arsenal today. Arteta held face-to-face talks, according to Scoop, which are the same outlet, of course, that reported that Bayern Munich were in advanced talks with Chido Obi-Martin over a potential deal. But after face-to-face talks with Mikel Arteta, confidence is growing that the 16-year-old super starlet striker will indeed be staying at the club for the foreseeable future, which is obviously very good news as well. We've got to hope that this story now materializes into something much more concrete, and that we can see Chido Obi-Martin remaining with Arsenal. I did put an inquiry in about this line, but got nothing back on this. So things on the club side are staying very quiet, it seems. But the same outlet that reported those stories, which sent the Arsenal fan base into meltdown, have since claimed that Arsenal are indeed more confident that Chido Obi-Martin will indeed be staying, which is hopefully a really good thing. And then hopefully we can see more of Obi-Martin in the coming season. You'd imagine if Arteta has held those face-to-face talks, there's been discussions about pathways and how indeed we might see him remain with the club in the future. Could this affect Arsenal's striker business? Could Arsenal decide, instead of opting to sign a centre-forward, that instead they prioritise a pathway for such a young player, after we've seen the exploits of 16-year-old Lamine Yamal at the European Championships? Could indeed Arsenal look for inspiration and potentially put more confidence in a young striker like Obi-Martin? I guess we will have to wait and see. Negotiations continue for Riccardo Calafiori. They remain ongoing with the Italian side. There is said to be some interesting stories about Bologna proposing Jakub Kivior coming the other way, which of course could change the structure of the deal, cheapen the deal for Arsenal to take Calafiori, with of course that 40% sell-on clause that does come with any deal to Basel. That's where, of course, that money would end up going. So I'm just being distracted by a ridiculous number of running deer next. There's loads of them. Hold on, I'm going to turn my camera quickly. I don't know if you can see this in real time. I'm just going to turn this up. Look at them. Look at them running. Well, you didn't think you'd see all that this morning. The final day that I am, of course, here in the New Forest. If you're listening on audio platforms, you'll have to hop over to minute 9:57. So I've seen that, but there you go. It's at the blue, sprinting deer in the morning. Hopefully, it won't be a. Hopefully, I won't be saying "oh dear" on Sunday when England take on Spain. But where was I? Yes, Calafiori. Calafiori, of course, those negotiations still ongoing. Jakub Kiwior, if involved in a deal, could of course restructure that, which would be very, very good indeed for Arsenal, and maybe get the price down. But we want to get a really good price for Jakub Kiwior, and there is a lot of interest from Inter, from Juve, from AC Milan, and Arsenal know this, by the way. They are very much well aware of how much interest there is in their Polish defender, and they will hope that will help them get a lot of money through the door for him. But our final story of the day, our headline story, again, more information coming from Spain that Arsenal are said to be, and Mikel Arteta in particular, very keen on Mikel Merino, the Spain international and Real Sociedad central midfielder. Could be a player that is very much rising up the ranks of targets for the club this summer. He's had a very good European Championship, obviously so much so as a substitute, mainly for Spain, scoring that key goal against Germany to see them through to the semi-finals of the competition. And he remains a very key part of De La Fuente's squads, often being one of the first off the bench to come and make plays into the midfield, of course, playing alongside Rodri. I've said before on the channel, I've said this for a number of weeks, I've said this for a number of years, for those that have been listening back onto the channel previous years, previous summers, when I've talked about central midfielders, I have always mentioned Mikel Merino as a potential option for Arsenal in the middle. It comes now as a player who is, of course, older at 28 years of age. He won't be turning 29 until June of next year. So he's 28 indeed until he turns 29. But Mikel Merino is indeed a talented central midfielder. And if there is not a marquee option in the midfield for Arsenal to sign this window, it could be a very shrewd piece of business to get Arsenal in some guaranteed quality now, and of course then try to pursue some other deals in the future for some, younger, more established and potentially world-class signings. This deal would, of course, not stop Arsenal from doing that in future windows, which would be very good to do indeed. Right, let's jump to the questions and part two right after this. Okay, this is part two of the show. Of course, we jump into the chat box and we tackle some of your questions as to the best of my ability. So let's do that. I am still very distracted by the chaos that's going outside the window. For those that maybe have tuned in late, just rewind 3 minutes to this point and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. But yes, let's jump into the chat, not waste any more time. Craig says, if not for Rodri, maybe he would be starting for Spain. Now, Moreno is a box-to-box midfielder. He is not a defensive midfielder. For Real Sociedad, he plays very much ahead of Martin Zubimendi and would be playing ahead of Rodri. If Rodri wasn't playing, I imagine Zubimendi would probably be starting in the midfield. But Spain's midfield has been very interesting throughout the course of this tournament. Of course, they've got some very well-accomplished players in the Spanish national side, especially in the midfield. And there's been some interesting links as well to Dani Olmo, I should point out. I didn't include it in my stories today because Arsenal haven't been specifically mentioned, but there's been a lot of reports suggesting that this release clause of 50 million euros, which expires on the 15th, which of course is before Sunday's final, of I think 50 to 60 million euros. Sorry, just the day after the European Championship final. But they've been playing with Fabian Ruiz and Dani Olmo in the midfield ever since Pedri suffered that injury in the opening games of the competition. And he has been, Olmo, very, very good. And I would be very open to seeing Olmo arrive at Arsenal. But Mikel Merino, of course, would be probably the next on that list now with the players that, of course, are available. He's the first substitute often looked to for the Spain midfield. Very accomplished player, very good player, very consistent player, and a good leader, captain figure in that La Real side as well. But don't get it twisted, he's not a DM. He is a box-to-box player gives you plenty going forwards, gives you plenty defensively as well. I mean, having a quick look at his FB ref, I've actually written an article about Mikel Merino in a little bit more depth and detail with his stats. But if you look at his FB ref profile, he ranks in the 94th percentile for non-penalty goals. He ranks in the 77th percentile for successful take-ons. He ranks in the 93rd percentile for touches in the attacking penalty area for midfielders in the top 5 European leagues. He ranks in the 76th percentile for progressive passes, but receives. He also ranks in the 83rd percentile for tackles, the 59th for blocks, the 88th for clearances, the 99th for aerial duels won. He ranks well across the board. He's a very well-rounded central midfielder, of course, playing for Real Sociedad. So let's see if it was indeed that he was to move to Arsenal, what changes that could potentially bring to his team. Prem says Moreno is a similar age as Watkins, and yet you don't worry about Moreno's age compared to Watkins. Is there any reason for this? Excellent question, and really good to point it out. Yes, there is a reason for this. The reason why the age difference is important for Watkins compared to what it is for Moreno is because, as I've mentioned, we're looking at Moreno as potentially a short-term signing, which financially would be much more favourable. I'm not talking about spending the £60 million on his release clause. I'm spending more around the £30 million figure for a player that could give you some quality for 2 to 3 years. The difference between that and Ollie Watkins, which you're fair to point out, is that Watkins is going to cost you 100 million plus, and that investment is only going to last a much shorter period of time. So that's why the age similarity, but ultimately the financial differences and why indeed those profiles to be able to look at signing both of those players is different. I hope that makes sense. Loga says Southgate is going to start Kane, and to be fair, questionable late sub things has got them to the final, and it's difficult to argue against that. Obviously, my criticism of Gareth Southgate hasn't waned. I believe Arsenal, I always do this. I believe England are in the final of the European Championships in spite of the manager rather than because of the manager. And ultimately, England's players have delivered, and we have delivered to the best of what we've had on offer to us. We could have been better. We can be better, and there is more that should be expected of this England team with the quality that is available to Gareth Southgate. But you've got to give the man some credit, of course, for making the changes that he did. He could have brought on Ivan Toney instead. He recognised that Ollie Watkins was the better centre forward for the moment, and it paid off. So a massive, massive credit to Southgate, of course, for making that change and making that decision. But it doesn't outweigh all of the other side of the argument, which I will certainly be maintaining should even England win the championship on Sunday. Rob says, can we see some Chelsea-like transfer dealings? Kivior part swap 1 million to reduce Bologna's 40% sell-on clause. I'm playing devil's advocate, but could these financial creative accounting be done for Arsenal? I'm not really keen on Arsenal taking much inspiration from Chelsea, to be honest, Rob, when it comes to transfers or investment whatsoever. It's just not for me. I understand where you're coming from, but Kivior, if Bologna are interested, hopefully could get Arsenal a significant amount of money off the deal for Calafiori. I'd be looking at getting at least £25 million, maybe halving the price of Calafiori, if indeed it is to be that that is the deal that happens over the course of the next few weeks or so. Arsenal says, I remember a couple of weeks ago we had interest in Joshua Kimmich. Is there still said to be interest there? I'd be shocked if Arsenal's interest had disappeared. There is certainly interest from Arsenal in Joshua Kimmich, but it seems as though Manchester City look the most viable option at the moment for Kimmich, which is a shame because I would love to see Arsenal go for Kimmich, but it doesn't look like that is the case. He says, it's coming home, Tom. I'm watching you from Poland, Warsaw. I think that Saka's goal should have stood. I still don't know why the goal was disallowed. It was offside. Walker on the right-hand side was offside in the build-up. But Saka, of course, was in the right place at the right time, the right finish. It was all Walker's fault that goal was ruled out and that it wasn't Saka celebrating taking England through to the European Championship final. Mark says, I wonder what sanctions will come for Darwin Nunez for going into the stands after the Colombia game. Any chance of a sanction that could affect his season with Liverpool? Crazy scenes, it has to be said, after the game between Colombia and Uruguay at the Copa America, with Darwin Nunez, as Mark describes, in the stands, in scuffles with opposition supporters. Now, there is plenty of context that is perhaps missing, and some suggestions are that there were threats toward his family and that he was protecting his family. So it's important, I think, to wait for all of the facts to come out in these types of stories before making much of a huge story about it. I don't remember, if I'm right in thinking and remembering, Eric Dyer getting a sanction when he, of course, went into the stands to confront supporters surrounding his family. I don't remember him getting sanctions for that, so I don't know if there will be any differences with this incident. Of course, Darwin Nunez was seen being. There was, quite a few scuffles going on. It was a little bit different to the Eric Dyer situation, or quite a lot different to the Eric Dyer situation, to be fair. Yeah, let's wait and see. It's a very interesting story, and I'm very intrigued to see how it transpires. Reese says, Tom, do you think Nwaneri is the answer? Could he be our Kobbie Mainoo? Obviously, he's a different type of player to Mainoo. Mainoo is very much a box-to-box midfielder, and Nwaneri is much more of an attacking midfield player. But who knows? Could we see Nwaneri become the left 8 for us? It's definitely something I'd like to see Arsenal give him an opportunity to discover if he can be that player. Of course, if we indeed need to substitute Ødegaard in games that we have a significant lead in, or we can afford to make a change and give Nwaneri some minutes, I would like to see him prioritised over someone like Fabio Vieira in those moments. I think it is smarter to give him that situation. Ben says, do you expect anyone at the Marbella training camp to change Arteta's thoughts on their futures? I doubt it. I don't think that there's a training camp that could necessarily be transformative for your future as an Arsenal player. I think, of course, it looks good, of course, for the players to cut their holiday slightly short to work on their fitness, work on slightly more training, and work with the manager. But Reiss Nelson, of course, who was there with the team, he has made it clear to the club, according to David Ornstein, that he is open to looking at his options. So even though he's there, he's still very much open to leaving Arsenal. So I don't think it necessarily changes things too greatly. Jean says, am I the only one who doesn't want to sell Kivior? I really think he has a role in Arsenal, and he hasn't gotten a chance at the middle of our defence. This is his, of course, strongest role. You're not the only one, because I know there's a lot of appreciation for Kivior. I appreciate Kivior a lot. I just think that I've kind of made my peace with the fact that I think it's exceptionally likely that he will, of course, leave during this window now. And in which case, I wish him all the best. But I absolutely see where you're coming from, Sean. And I think if Arsenal were to keep him, they'd be hanging on to still a very, very good player. So I think it's win-win either way. Either Arsenal hope they make a profit, or they keep him and we've got a good depth player in the squad. Ant says, Tom, with England and Spain reaching the final, does that mean that we're going to miss Saka, Rice and Raya for the start of the season because of a late return? There's definitely a greater chance that they could miss the start of the season. We aren't playing a Community Shield game. Let's wait and see. Players have, of course, made it back in time, and we've seen some players already cutting short their holidays to start their early training camp. So it may be that these players, I hope in some ways that we do rest Saka. I don't think we need Saka to beat Wolves on the opening day of the Premier League season. And then the next game, of course, is Aston Villa away from home, which is a very difficult game. So in some ways, I hope that we give Saka the rest that he needs, and maybe give Rice the rest that he needs. If we go out and sign an excellent midfielder, we may not need to start either of Rice or Saka or even Raya, if, of course, Ramsdale is still here, or if we sign another good goalkeeper as well. I hope that we won't need those players to be able to beat Wolves at home on the opening day of the season. Maybe they can be on the bench, but maybe I hope that we kind of are smart with how we use these players. I hope we're smart with how we reintegrate them, and I hope we're smart with how many minutes we ultimately ask of them, because I think we need to manage minutes much, much better than we have done in previous seasons. And Rice and Saka are at the forefront of that discussion. That is without question. CJ Dan says we need to buy Neves to make sure that we can beat Wolves in the opening game. Neves, of course, is currently, I don't think that he'll be there, Dan. He's already been sold to Al Hilal, and it wasn't a loan as far as I'm aware. I think it was a permanent deal. So Neves will not be with Wolves, but maybe João Gomez is the player that you mean, Dan. And of course, if that is the case, then I agree with you. I'd be very open to seeing João Gomez come to Arsenal. So Nicholas says, wait, Tom, you actually like a player? Does this mean that you don't really hate waffles? It's the way it goes, mate. It's the way that it goes. Ugang says, Tom, seems this is more of a commercial recouping window for us, as we haven't been linked to any big bootlet players. I don't know what that means. I've never heard that phrase, unless it's a typo. You mean marquee type players until now? Not panicking, but just doesn't seem to be a summer window like the last two. I don't think that's necessarily down to Arsenal. I think that's more so down to the market. I think that, of course, what we've seen over recent seasons and over recent summers is actually Arsenal being very smart in the market. David Ornstein was actually recently speaking about Edu and about the ownership and about, of course, what we've come to expect from Arsenal. And he spoke very complimentary, of course, of how Arsenal have conducted their business over the recent kind of seasons that we've come to expect. I'm just trying to find the story if I can for you. Yeah, here we go. I think this is right. So at AFC Mex on Twitter, I'm not sure where David Ornstein was saying this, but I did see this across multiple outlets. Yes, here we go. Here's the exact quote on the Athletic podcast. Arsenal, it's from David Ornstein, says, Arsenal are always going to be active in these markets. Some feel it's been a bit of a slow start for them, but I don't think so. They'll have their targets in place. There's been Euro 2024 and the Copa America. Maybe that creates a bit of impatience. If anything, we've seen from Edu and the Kroenke ownership in recent years is that they do really well in the market. They make their moves, they're pretty decisive, and they tend to be successful, and they're ready to invest. This is a market I'm sure Arsenal will tackle in a strong way as it goes on. And I think that if you are panicking right now, I know it's really easy for me to say don't, and for that to be any kind of transformative kind of feeling to you, but you shouldn't be panicking about Arsenal in this window at all. I'm not panicking. Even going into the start of August, I don't think I'll necessarily be panicking. You know why? Because we already have a brilliant team. And there is still a long, long way to go in this market for Arsenal to do the business that they would like to do. And I don't want to see Arsenal sign players for the sake of signing players. That is not helpful to us. That's not helpful to Arteta. It's not helpful for our long-term ambitions. We shouldn't be signing players for the sake of it. And also, if you look at the other teams in the market right now, Man City aren't doing anything. Liverpool aren't doing anything. Manchester United are trying to do things, but not doing it very successfully so far, but they're trying to sign players. Chelsea, of course, had to do business because of the situation they found themselves in. And Tottenham only brought in really Archie Gray, to my understanding, at this point in time. Aston Villa, of course, like Chelsea, also had to do some business before that deadline of PSR, but otherwise have been pretty quiet since that deadline closed. So it's not like we are slow compared to loads of other teams, because our biggest rival, City, as well, aren't really doing anything because, of course, the championships have been on. Players are now still on holiday. And I think things, as I said before, will kick up in the mid to late section of July. We'll start seeing more during that period. Of course, as Arsenal go away to the United States, that's when we saw Zinchenko arrive. Of course, he joined up from Manchester City's training ground and training exercises in the United States while he was on pre-season with City, and he joined Arsenal for their pre-season while out there. So it's not like we haven't done business and still got in good players during that period as well. K Pantior says, haven't City signed Savio? Yes, but Savio is part of the City football group. So it's not exactly like it's them going out and finding a player and signing them. He's moved from one of their group teams to their current group team. So not the best example in terms of players, of course, that City are trying to do. Ben says, I've seen reports that Calafiori deal is slow because Arteta has to convince the higher-ups that we need him. I agree that we don't due to Timber and Kivior. What's your thoughts on this? I think that we do. Arsenal this last season got exceptionally lucky, and I think people are taking it for granted with how fit our defenders were. We also don't have an established left-sided defender, and Timber is not guaranteed to be that player. He could be seen more so as a competitor for Ben White than as a left back. And he came on in the final game of the Premier League season, of course, as a right back. I think that Calafiori has got the potential and the quality and the guaranteed quality existing right now to be an Arsenal left back for the future, from what I have seen in the last few weeks, doing plenty of in-depth research and watching of him. So I think he's a signing that we need. And I think that people are being somewhat, with respect, naive about how lucky we were with our fitness of our defenders over the course of last season. Saliba played every single minute of every single Premier League game last season. That is something I don't expect to happen again unless we, again, are very, very lucky. So let's keep those fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But we need 8 defenders, and we have 7, and we need 8. So I'm hoping that we add that 8th defender. So you've got 2 players across each of the back 4 positions. And I also hope that Calafiori brings us that extra bit of difference that we've got. We don't have a Calafiori. We have left-sided defenders. We've got Tomiyasu can play there, Timber can play there, Kivior can play there, Gabriel can play there, of course. But we don't have what Calafiori is. Calafiori is a very different profile of defender to what we have got on the left-hand side. And he excites me. His profile excites me. The price excites me. All of everything to do with Calafiori excites me. His age excites me in terms of what we could see from him in the future as he develops and what he's already showing at such a young age. So there's lots to be excited about with that. I don't really see why it would be a critical or a scrutinized signing, if you will. That's going to bring us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much, as always, for listening and being a part of this TGT family. If you could ever be so kind and generous to drop a like on the video and help us to our 1K every day challenge. Tomorrow morning, I'll be back in usual surroundings. There'll be no more dear interruptions. But thank you for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. And we've nearly made it to Friday. 3 more days, and it could be coming home. We have to wait and see. But I'm looking forward to it. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.